Hello, everyone. Okay, so we're going to go through cloud native SBC and automation for enterprise. So before getting into the solution suite, let's first talk about what's happening in the communications environment for enterprise. What we have is, first off, going back to the 2010 timeframe. And since the 2010 timeframe, what was novel at the time to be able to support real-time communications and security related to that real-time communications and interoperability and mediation was to have premises-based devices. Premises-based devices in support of unified communications, premises-based devices in support of contact center applications. This premises-based equipment was either physical appliances, so meaning you would go to your vendor, your session border controller vendor, and you would acquire from them a physical appliance, or certainly in recent years, you could acquire virtualized software from them. A virtualized software meaning that you have an application which is tightly coupled with the operating system, or in particular the guest operating system being delivered by the vendor in question. This equipment, when you're talking about physical appliances, also supported TDM. So, for example, primary rate interface connections as well as analog lines. And typically what happens is that this equipment in support of these devices is managed by a dedicated telecom team at the enterprise in question. Today, what's happening is we have heard loud and clear from the customer base their preference to move support for unified communications, or the securities and interoperability and mediation associated with unified communications and contact center applications, to be cloud-based. In particular, we're getting strong demand for these solutions to be deployed in public cloud and also on premises as well, with respect to a private cloud that an enterprise might set up. The communication streams primarily go over SIP trunks, and that the equipment would be managed by the IT team that the enterprise has available. This is what primarily customers are requesting today. In terms of what the session border controller happens to do, we've listed the main features that the session border controller provides, that being interoperability between the public switch telephone network that you see over to the left and the equipment that the enterprise has on premises. Interoperability, also security, so that being ensuring that whatever happens to be coming in from the public switch telephone network or over the top internet connections, that communication happens to be secure and is not presenting any sort of threat to the enterprise. And also just keeping a measure of control with respect to how communications happens to be serviced. You could go about acquiring session border controller services from a service provider, but with that being said, the degree to which you would be able to manipulate that offer coming from a hosted solution, oftentimes for enterprises and in particular large enterprises, doesn't give them the flexibility that they happen to be looking for. Hence the reason why enterprises, in most cases, happen to deploy session border controllers and the complementary supporting functions on with them, as opposed to acquiring it from someone else. Now, it's probably worthwhile just spending a few moments just talking about what a session border controller happens to do. And as mentioned before, first and foremost, you want to be looking at the session border controller as being a firewall. But it's a very unique firewall in that it's tuned to address real-time communications. By virtue of the role that it happens to play, it provides protection against overload conditions and denial of service for real-time communications that otherwise would be difficult to offer with alternatives. It also provides you with supporting real-time communications in terms of mediation of one form of communications protocol to another. It undertakes that mediation, that interoperability. It can also look into the particular real-time communications call and undertake inspection of who is attempting to place the call and thereby take actions if it turns out that the agent who's looking to get access to your company happens to be someone who you would prefer not to be able to place a call. So the session border controller, look at it as being a real-time communications tuned firewall. That's the way to look at it. Okay, so again, as we were talking to in the prior slide before, we talked about what's been in place essentially since the early or late 2000s, early 2010, where customers went about deploying session border controllers in support of their real-time communications workloads. They did so with physical devices and in later years with virtualized appliances. Now, unfortunately, with that kind of an offer, and for good reason, the costs associated with that kind of implementation, especially when you're looking at what's available today, tends to be on the high side. It's also quite complex as well. It's difficult to undertake or rapidly introduce new features into those devices, and there's little opportunities for automation. And so as a result of that, enterprises have had to bear the costs associated with these purpose-built devices that are managed completely on their own, managed in a vendor unique way in order to ensure that they are able to get the security and the interoperability and the mediation services that they require for their real-time communications. However, there is an alternative now, and that would be with a cloud native offer. And with a cloud native offer, which we're trying to paint over to the right in the magenta, a cloud native offer is one that happens to be built around microservices, implemented with containers. So you probably have heard that term, containers. You've probably also heard about Kubernetes as an orchestrator for applications in a cloud native setting. And I'm more than sure that you've heard about continuous deployment, continuous integration, and automation. All of that becomes available when you happen to deploy a solution set that happens to be cloud native in nature. With a cloud native offer, now all of a sudden you have available to you as an enterprise the opportunity to be able to efficiently deploy the session border controller in either a private cloud setting or a public cloud setting. You're able to simplify the operations surrounding that cloud native application through the use of Kubernetes itself and all of the tooling that you find being broadly adopted in the industry due to cloud native computing foundation identified practices and standards. And you're also in a position with regards to being provided to you through automation, the opportunity to be able to undertake upgrades much more quickly than you had been in the past. And so that happens to address that slow application innovation, which you happen to see over to the left. That becomes, that gets turned on its head when you're talking about deploying a cloud native application suite.
Umar, can I quickly interject with a question from the previous slide about SBCs? Somebody made a really good point in the audience that some data firewalls may have a SIP ALG function, therefore negating the need for an SBC. That's a good point, actually, that's being made. The ALG function of an SBC, of a firewall for just for educational purposes, is something called an application layer gateway function, where you have a data firewall with a SIP interface integrated into the firewall, effectively. And typically what you'll find is most people that have that function in a data firewall end up turning it off completely after finding out a bunch of things, namely compatibility issues. There's some protocol variations with SIP where different vendors implement the SIP stack differently in VoIP, and that ends up causing issues in core flows. So the ALG's logic may make some incorrect assumptions about different variations, and that leads to communication problems, dropped calls, or one-way audio type of things. The other one that comes up a lot is performance impacts. The processing overhead that's required is quite high. So when you're doing deep packet inspection and examining every data packet that's coming out at the application level, the ALG portion of the data firewall can't keep up with it. So that's an intensive process that basically slows down the performance. From a configuration perspective, it's challenging because each protocol has a specific setup to itself. For example, if you have to do FTP, HTTP, SIP itself, so managing all the complexities of multiple protocol configuration, that adds to configuration challenges. And obviously when you do upgrades, you got to make sure it still works. All those different things that come with it. But I think one of the biggest ones is probably the security risk, where you have potential vulnerabilities where the ALG code itself might contain some vulnerabilities that attackers could exploit. And there are definite historical cases where ALGs have allowed an attacker to bypass this ALG function and open unauthorized connections, something that would never happen on an SBC. And so you're bypassing all the security policies, and bypassing some of the firewall policies that are built in that would normally block packets, and effectively opening up connections that should not be allowed on an ALG. So long story short is, while it's, it causes some issues with compatibility and configuration changes in performance, security is probably the biggest one, and it ends up being turned off at the end of it, and people end up just understanding that a purpose dedicated built SBC function is what's necessary in these cases. So I just wanted to cover that point, because it's a really good point about ALG. It comes up a lot.
Thank you, David, for that. That's a very good question, and thank you for the explanation. Okay, so just to spend a few moments on an example benefit associated with a cloud native deployment, as opposed to the traditional physical or virtual appliances that competitive solutions happen to provide, or that predate the availability of the cloud native solution. Over to the left, what we're trying to show with that picture is over time, you can see that over to the far left, You have, and in this case, we're presenting an active standby cloud native application that's deployed within a cloud native data center. Should there be a failure of the active instance, what happens is that the standby that you see to the far left, it gets activated, and you can see that being denoted with the active prime. It gets activated and starts to carry the traffic for the SBC, or addressing the SBC workload. But what you'll also see is pretty much right away a standby instance also being brought up at a completely different location within the data center. And that standby is essentially ready to go. So the SBC is never really operating in a condition where you just have the one instance of the active standby pair operating while you as a customer happen to be in a state of panic trying to get back or determine what's happened with the prior active instance and what caused its failure. And it's so resilient that should it be the case that another failure happens to occur, the SBC is reconfigured again within the cloud native data center such that you always have the active and the standby. Now, we're not presenting here the auto-scaling version of our session border controller for enterprise. This is just the simple active standby pair. But you can get a sense for the resiliency of the cloud native offer when you happen to look at the alternative, which you see over to the right, which is what you find with physical appliances and virtual appliances, where with an active standby SBC deployment, where there happens to be a failure of one of the two, essentially you're running in standalone mode. And this is obviously a concern to the enterprise telecom team, in that you've got the one unit that happens to be responsible for providing security and providing the availability of real-time voice services that you obviously have to address as quickly as possible to get back to a state of having an active standby. Just having that one active, should it be the case that that also happens to go down, then you've got a situation where there doesn't happen to be any real-time voice services available. So that's what we mean by the heightened service interruption risk. You know, you're in a state of panic from a telecom team perspective. Now, the thing which you could do in order to overcome this concern with the predecessor offer, with the physical appliances, with the virtual appliances, you could always have extra pairs of SBCs to minimize the risk of standalone operations. The only problem with that is that you have to bear all of these extra infrastructure costs in order to reduce that service risk. And so with the predecessor offers, you're either running in a heightened state of risk or you're incurring extra infrastructure costs. All of that doesn't happen to be with you should you be deploying a cloud native solution. Another advantage of a cloud native offer is, and in this case, we're demonstrating the auto-scaling cloud native session border controller, is as your workload happens to increase, the SBC is automatically reconfigured to add additional resources to handle the higher workloads. And you can see that in the transition to the busy hour, where you have essentially your SBC smeared across your entire data center to address the heightened workload. But as traffic happens to decline, so you're moving to an off-peak workload, the resources are returned. You can see in a public cloud setting, if you had this session border controller being deployed, the opportunity for you to turn down instances, virtual machine instances in something like Azure or AWS or GCP, that gives you the opportunity to reduce your costs while at the same time giving you the opportunity for unlimited resources should you require it in order to address any spike in workload or unforeseen workload situations. Now we painted over to the right use cases where this becomes invaluable. One might be, for example, with call recording. So it could be the case that with a given call, what you're going to look to do is to forward that call to multiple analysis engines, which could provide you as an enterprise information about how well the agents happen to be addressing the customer's concern. It would afford you the opportunity for compliance. It would afford you the opportunity for sentiment analysis. We've had a request from a global bank that what they would like to do is to be able to take each and every call and replicate it to 9 unique destinations for purposes like what I just mentioned. That becomes available to you in a cloud native setting. To try and replicate that with a physical appliance or a virtual appliance is extremely difficult. And that's by virtue of the fact that you happen to be essentially supporting the SBC workload in a single target. Whereas with a cloud native deployment, the appliance which is serving the SBC workload is the entire data center. So it's a completely different paradigm. You can see that if there was traffic spikes, maybe around holidays or other such occasions, as an enterprise, there'd be no lost revenue. There would be no loss of service to customers. You'd be able to address all those calls because the resources available to the application are essentially your data center and not just the one physical device. And furthermore, you can also support use cases where there happens to be significant processing required for mediation, for example. And we've given the example of interworking between one high fidelity media format, that being AMR wideband, which is used on wireless on mobile devices, and Opus, which is another high fidelity media protocol. So all of that, these kinds of use cases can be fully addressed easily in a cloud native setting, not so easy to address when we're talking about, or highly inefficient to address, I should say, with the predecessor offers. I'm going to turn this over to David. Did you want to talk through the next few slides?
Yeah, thanks, Umar. Just looking at the time, I'll zip through my next couple of slides because we're running out of time quickly. So let's build on the back of this cloud native SBC thinking. So with containerization, with Kubernetes, with auto scaling, and everything that Umar just talked about, your moving parts are going to go from one physical or one virtual machine, one physical box or one virtual machine, to numerous pods, containers, services, API connections, and all these different interdependencies between them. And so you gain a lot of flexibility on capacity, serviceability, and resiliency, and those kind of things. But that comes at the price of simplicity. And what you'll find is that containerization and automation, so cloud native SBCs and automation, absolutely go hand in hand. And the beauty of this transition is that once you've done that, your modern cloud native SBCs now align with your wider IT modernization efforts. And so we're going to walk through the key differences here that you see on the screen. where you're bridging technologies together and then the benefits of this transformation. So on the left-hand side, you see the characteristics of a traditional SBC environment. So dedicated hardware, dedicated machines, where you're relying on physical appliances, which tend to be costly or somewhat complex to scale or maintain. Then you've got the manual provisioning side of things, where the configuration and the deployment are usually manual, leading to slower rollout times, potentially higher risk of human errors, but sometimes they're scripted. We get that. But think of the upgrade process. This is one of the most common themes of enterprise SBCs is upgrades. Oh my God, we have to keep up with the upgrades. It's so hard to do. We've got to do testing to go with that, et cetera, right? And then some of the legacy protocols that might be involved, where you might have some older communication protocols that may not integrate well with the modern cloud services that we're talking about. On the right-hand side, you see the characteristics of a modern IT house that's hopefully one of yours, where you see the virtualizations where everything that's being used as a resource is kind of abstracted from the hardware, essentially, which allows you for flexibility and efficiency when you're using the infrastructure. On the delivery of software, we've got this CI/CD pipeline practice where these are not just tools, but they're a core part of the development lifecycle, where your development team are relying on software that's provided to them by vendors, and then that basically put together enables a rapid and reliable software delivery mechanism. And if you tie that in with DevOps practices, which emphasizes collaboration between the different departments like development and operations, and then bring in the automation, that's how you end up with continuous improvement. And if you put those two together and you bring in your SBC cloud native in the center, you get to bridge that gap by sharing tool chains between both sides of the house, if you like. So on the infrastructure now, you're consuming that infrastructure as a code, so ISE. So this allows SBCs to be defined and managed through code, which enables this repeatability and version control phenomenon that we keep hearing about. And this is key to a predictability through automation. On the continuous integration and continuous deployment pipeline side of things, you can automate your testing, you can automate your upgrades and your deployments. And then on the monitoring side, you get real-time observability tools that help you detect, resolve issues quickly, that improve the system reliability, and then all the other benefits that Umar was talking about in literally the previous slide. And then finally, the orchestration gets to be done easily here because tools like Kubernetes will manage those containerized applications and then ensure, again, like Umar was talking about, they'll ensure that the scalability and the resilience aspect of it is taken care of automatically for all intents and purposes. And that gets us to the bottom section of this slide where you see the strategic outcomes. So with DevOps and SecOps alignments, for example, your security team and your security practice and your security posture is no longer just a silo, but it's integrated into that development lifecycle. And it's integrated into your traditional SBC world. And there's no longer sort of, I don't want to call it infighting, but sort of clashing between the different goals that the two teams have. And so from that, you ensure compliance rules that you might have are now adhered to, and you reduce the number of vulnerabilities that are exposed, and you can have all the CIA triad sort of mitigation controls that you need for your SecOps teams. And then effectively, you're ensuring that these teams are working together more efficiently across these different silos and accelerating that innovation. And more importantly, in my opinion, the response times when it comes to outages or incident remediation or vulnerability, et cetera, right? So that transformation is not just about technology, but it's more about adopting a mindset that embraces automation, that embraces agility, and then collaboration between different teams. And so by bridging this IT gap, your organization can modernize the infrastructure, you can improve your service delivery, but also stay ahead of any security gaps that come up. And I think I heard a colleague of mine the other day talk about roughly, on average, 150 CVEs, so vulnerabilities are found in every single month, which is a lot to keep up with. And so that leads us nicely into the automation topic, where Ribbon is absolutely racing ahead of competition by bringing together four things: a cloud intelligent platform, a low-code, no-code builder, a consulting practice, and finally, two DevOps teams that are focused on infrastructure automation, as well as XOps, with the hottest topic today being AI ops, and I'm sure you've heard of that. So the idea of XOps is pretty straightforward. If anybody in your company is looking to ingest and observe some data with a typical three value buckets that you see on the right-hand side there, which are cost savings, cost avoidance, or revenue generation. And obviously there are sub-buckets that go underneath that. So customer satisfaction, maybe compliance, there's other things that go in there, time savings, all that falls into the main three buckets that you see there. This is what automation is all about, where if you're going to use that data to streamline or automate a process or predict issues, and the best way to describe this is you're sitting on tons of data. And in our case, we don't really care whether it's Ribbon or third-party data. You're spending a lot of time trying to make sense of things. You're trying to glean insights. You're trying to capacity plan, various stages of your network. You're trying to provision. You're trying to troubleshoot. And you're doing that today, as it says on the screen, either manually or in some semi-scripted automation fashion. The idea with XOps is, hopefully this paints nicely. There you go. XOps will help you orchestrate actions out of that data that will be valuable to you and your internal or external customers, depending how you expose that data, with an easy framework to build your own application. So you might say, well, I have an analytics platform today that does that for me. Yeah, you might have that platform. It might have sensors, it might have enforcers, some basic automation tools, machine learning, intelligence, etc. Right? But I'd like you to think of it this way. Yes, I can accomplish my current goal X with my analytics platform today, but what can I do even better tomorrow with an automation platform? And the main point is you're not just leveraging analytics so you can fix a visibility gap in a process today. Hopefully you're looking to automate the whole process and the whole workflow that goes with it. And so what we're seeing at Ribbon is a trend of hyper automation where CI/CD, so continuous improvement and continuous deployment, is brought together with artificial intelligence, with machine learning and RPA, so robotic process automation, to perform this XOps task. And then the benefits are immense when you look at the whole automation topic together, as you'll see in a second in the next slide. So looking at this slide, if it paints properly, hopefully, there we go. We're going to look at it from three angles, and I'll just paint the whole slide so it doesn't distract from us. We're going to look at the benefits of automation across three main dimensions. And the first one being cost savings and business agility and performance, and then how you can transform your operations and then drive value across the organization that you're in. So first, looking at cost savings, it's the primary driver for automation initiatives today. Every single conversation I've had about automation starts with, where's the money? And so you start with, well, you're freeing up architecture, you're freeing up engineering and operation time, where automation reduces the need for manual interventions. You're allowing your teams to focus on strategic initiatives rather than repeating repetitive tasks. And the way I like to talk about this is you help remove kindergarten stuff from their plate so you can focus on PhD stuff effectively. That's what automation is all about. It's not about replacing humans. It's about getting rid of the stuff that can be automated that's repetitive. On the outages side, you get fewer of them because automated systems are just a lot more predictable and less prone to human error, which obviously, by definition, significantly reduces the downtime. And on the resolution time, once you're troubleshooting and trying to fix things and bring things back to normal, when issues do occur, automated monitoring, remediation tools, self-healing tools, they can detect and resolve them quickly. And so the other aspect of this is when you've got a lot of alarms, you get this noise reduction effect where you just focus on going from 100 logs or 100 alarms down to the 2 that are really helpful to you to troubleshoot the issue and resolve the issue. And then with human in the loop, you can leverage assistance from AI agents, you can chat with the logs, et cetera, et cetera. On the upgrade side, we all know how painful they can be. Like I said, as I said, the automation can streamline the upgrade process and reduce the time and effort it requires to roll out new versions or new patches. And like I said, whether it's regression testing itself before the upgrade and then doing it after the upgrade, or the upgrade part itself, is just such a painful process in general to keep up with upgrades. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier on, XOps. This refers to the broader adoption of mixing together DevOps, SecOps, NetOps, ChatOps, all these different ops, and then all the other operational models that you might hear about that benefit from automation to improve, as I mentioned earlier on, efficiency, and then obviously bring collaboration into that conversation. Below that, we have the business agility aspect, which is essential in today's fast-moving markets for all intents and purposes. If you want to stay ahead of your competition, this is a known thing, you just have to be agile. And in the network lifecycle stages, think of, from the first day of deployment all the way to I'm innovating, this is the revenue generated phase towards the end where it's called the innovation phase. So you get faster time to market because automation accelerates the testing and deployment of new features, which obviously helps you innovate more quickly. On the agility side, organizations can respond more effectively to your changing business needs, whether it's you need scaling services, as Umar mentioned earlier, auto scaling, whether you're going to go and test a new market, when you want to enter a new market, you will just test it quickly without having to deploy massive pieces of hardware and things like that. Or maybe your customer demands have changed, so you need to adapt to those quickly. So that gives you the business agility aspect. And there's more to this. I'm just summarizing it for the purposes of this webinar. And then finally, let's talk about the performance, both in terms of system reliability and then operational consistency. There's an effect of reduced manual provisioning and scaling and patching tasks, because automation is going to handle these things for you efficiently, and it's going to reduce the workload on your engineers and obviously on your IT teams. And then with the collaboration that I mentioned earlier on between the different teams, now you have everybody speaking the same language. Manual errors, reduced manual errors, because minimizing human involvement in a repetitive process automatically, by definition, automation is going to significantly lower that risk of a mistake because it's already in the repetitive process. Service interruptions that might come from missed bugs. Think about the number of interruptions per year, the number of calls you might be testing in an upgrade, the risk of a delayed security patch cost, maybe the loss of revenue from delaying new features. There might even be some regulatory penalties that you need to account for when it comes to manual errors. So if you put all those things together, it falls into the performance aspect, but it also goes back to the cost savings that we talked about earlier on. Consistent deployments across different environments. We all know that sometimes you go into a lab, you go into production, you go into a development sort of environment, you find 3 different versions of code. So automation ensures that applications are deployed the same way, whether it's in development, in testing, or production, and that reduces the variability and the number of bugs that you're going to come across by definition. And then last but not least, the reduced configuration drift, which is a problem where you go into the golden config file and you look at the config and it says something different than what's in the actual production system effectively. So the automated configuration management tool, and we talked about it earlier on, deploying infrastructure as a code, maintains the consistency across the different systems, which prevents that gradual divergence from the configuration, the golden configuration, and that can lead to those issues that I mentioned about. So this practice is called declarative provisioning, where it's more intent-based than script-based, effectively. So just to summarize quickly, automation is not just a technical upgrade. It's a strategic enabler that goes hand in hand with cloud-native SBCs, which drive cost efficiencies, as we talked about, the agility in your business, and the performance increases. So we talked about cloud-native SBCs. We stressed the importance about adopting automation as a mindset. The title of this webinar is, my UC and CC is in the cloud already. Why not my SBC? So the question obviously that comes to mind is, what did this architecture look like at the end when all is said and done? What do I get? And for that, I'm going to hand you back to my highly esteemed colleague, Umar, to talk about that next slide. Over to you, Umar.
You're very kind, David. Thank you. Yes, so what this suite of solutions would look like when deployed. You've got your session border controller, you've got centralized routing and management being presented with the PSX and the ramp, and you've also got analytics and fraud protection with Ribbon's analytics and Call Trust solution set. And all of that has been tested and validated for interoperability with common real-time communications, call center applications coming from folks such as Genesys and Five9s, for example. It interworks with real-time switches, such as real-time comm switches, such as those coming from Avaya and Cisco. Also interworking with cloud-based services, such as Teams or Zoom or Twilio, RingCentral, etc. So with all of that, putting that solution suite together, you can make use of services such as fraud and robocall mitigation, and at the same time enjoy services associated with carrier-grade resiliency, the automation of deployment, as well as operations, and be able to do so in a private cloud setting or a public cloud setting. It's completely up to you. So the options available to the enterprise in terms of how they want to go about making or addressing the workload that the SBC along with the complementary solutions happen to provide, much more choice, much greater flexibility, and also the opportunity to significantly reduce costs while at the same time making use of or enjoying the opportunity for far quicker upgrades and being able to put new services and security updates into operation far more quickly than had been available to you before. So we've talked quite a bit about the impact of moving to a cloud native offer, that being to simplify staff workload, to lower costs, to enhance performance and resiliency, as well as improve security. How you can, or what aspects of the cloud native offer that allows you to be able to enjoy these benefits. With regards to the staff workload, it's the availability of the DevOps continuous integration, or more importantly, the continuous deployment pipeline. Being able to deploy in a manner like the ones which some of our recent customer engagements have talked to us about, where these enterprises, what excites them about moving to a cloud native paradigm to deploy their SBC workloads, they're bringing up the feasibility of, from the moment in time where we happen to make available a new software release and we post it in our registry, to the moment in time that updated software happens to be operating in the production environment and servicing live production workloads. That could be a matter of hours, as opposed to the current paradigm with the physical appliances and the virtual appliances, where we're talking about months and in some cases years before you actually are in a position to make use of the updated software. So it's a completely different paradigm, all enabled by virtue of the unprecedented automation that's available with a cloud native deployment. We talked about the examples of auto scaling and resiliency that's available to you with a cloud native offer that hasn't been there before with predecessor offers. Much harder to realize, and introduces significant additional costs as a result. And then you can go about improving security with your security operations practices being integrated. So this is a critical point that I think it's important to spend a few moments on. With a virtual appliance and a physical appliance, what essentially happens on the part of the enterprise in question is that the enterprise hands over, with respect to those applications, hands over responsibility for ensuring security with regards to the application to the vendor in question. So because the vendor happens to provide the physical appliance and everything within it, the operating system, the application, essentially you're trusting your supplier to ensure that they keep the images associated with those appliances, whether they be physical or virtual, that they're keeping them up to date, that they're introducing fixes for security, and they're doing so in a timely fashion that allows you to be able to say confidently to your IT, to your enterprise, that security practices are being met by the vendor in question. But what enterprises are coming to us and telling us today is that they don't want to hand over or have to necessarily trust the vendor in question with regards to security practices being complied with. Rather, what they would like to do is to say, we are going to define our security practices. You are not going to give us an appliance to put into our enterprise and connect into our network. You are going to provide us with application software that is going to operate within the context of an operating system and servers that we happen to manage in every respect, and that includes also security as well. With a cloud native offer, that now can be realized. You can bring that, you can make use of compliance to security practices in a manner that had never been achievable before. So that's a really exciting aspect of the cloud native and automation solution set that that customers are coming to us and telling us, in some cases, is the primary reason why they're moving to cloud native and evaluating our cloud native offer.
That's a good segue, Umar, because somebody just asked, do you have an example? So that's the next slide, literally.
Yes, yeah, we've got an example of a global Fortune 500 enterprise here. This is in the financial industry. And this global bank, what they are looking to do is to consolidate a multi-country network of session border controllers that they've acquired from us as well as other vendors. What they wanted to do is to undertake consolidation, all with the goal of being able to, and especially given the industry that they happen to be in, that they be able to roll out security updates far more quickly than they had been in the past, and also assure themselves that security updates are being undertaken at the time required to ensure that no vulnerability happens to be exposed. And they're also looking for the opportunity to reduce operational complexity, much along the lines of what David had talked to earlier. They evaluated, our solution, cloud native solution, as well as those coming from other vendors or alternatives coming from other vendors. And what they decided to do was move ahead with the cloud native by virtue of the fact that it happened to be agnostic to the underlying platform. So with the cloud native offer, essentially all we're doing is providing you the application. We're not providing you the guest OS anymore. We're not providing you with physical appliances. We're essentially saying, we don't care what the underlying infrastructure happens to be. You set it up however you like. And as long as there are these minimal infrastructure attributes in place, we are good to operate. And alongside that infrastructure agnosticism, we couple that with the opportunity for extensive automation, like what David had described earlier. With that automation, there's opportunity to make use of security updates or being able to place into production security updates on a moment's notice. Far more agile than the case before. And along with that, opportunities for data center consolidation. So we're really excited. This is one of many, and we're seeing more and more of these kinds of engagements across the industry. So we wanted to wrap up with, just giving you a sense of what we're seeing from enterprise, the nature of the enterprises that we're talking to, whether they be there's a smattering all over the place in finance, in insurance, healthcare, manufacturing, as well as software as a service. These engagements, we've been really taken aback how quickly these opportunities are starting to come in. It hadn't been the case at all times. We started here at Ribbon this effort towards bringing to market a cloud native offer. The original timeline was back in late 2022, if not earlier. And we've been working this cloud native offer essentially since late 2020, trying to put together a cloud native offer and bring it to market based on what we were seeing as the general market trend. It hasn't been an easy ride. Okay, it hasn't been. It's been it's been fraught with discovery, with a lot of hard work to try and come up with an optimal design that really delivered on the promise of the benefits that one would expect with a true cloud native offer, with the auto scaling, with the resiliency, with the automation. What we've seen with competitors is that they will position an offer as being cloud native, but when you happen to dig under the hood, you start to realize, well, it's essentially the same application that they already had before, whether physical appliance, whether virtual appliance. All they've simply done is remove the underlying operating system and then just turned it over. There aren't the benefits that one as an enterprise would expect with a true cloud native offer, being able to tie into third-party standard industry tooling for observability, for metrics collection, for automation with Kubernetes, for example, or with the managed Kubernetes offers that the public cloud vendors happen to provide with AWS with EKS, or Azure with AKS, or with OpenShift coming from Red Hat. That the ability for the application to operate in those settings and provide the benefits that we've gone through with a cloud native offer simply aren't there. With our solution,
Sorry,
all of
that's a great segue to one of the questions in the audience. So what are some of the performance restrictions or considerations to keep in mind when you're deploying SBCs in the cloud native environment? And as you said, if you just take your application and put in a container and say it's containerized now, that's not going to achieve the goal you're looking for, right? So there's things like latency, ensuring a low latency environment. Yes, you have container abstraction, but for example, in a switchover scenario, if your containers are 2,000 miles apart, obviously you're going to have a delay in switching over, because physical SBCs typically are connected back to back for HA purposes, and that gives you like this sub-second switchover time. Resource allocations, follow the recommended CPU and memory minimums, so that way you avoid contention. There's the networking side of things where you're using, as you mentioned, optimized network interfaces in the cloud and low latency paths for this real-time traffic. And then the scaling capabilities where pod autoscalers respond quickly to traffic spike, right? And then with the whole automation and the real-time observability that you literally just mentioned, and the analytics tools that goes with it to detect, predict, even predict jitter or packet loss or quality of service degradation, with the ability to take action to remediate it. That's one of the key things. So I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that on the performance restrictions or considerations when you're moving your clouds to the SBC. Anything that comes to mind that I didn't mention, Umar?
No, that's a really great summary and a very good point to make, David. It's a completely different paradigm when you happen to deliver the solution set according to true cloud native practices, as opposed to just taking the easy way out.
Exactly. One of the other questions I was going to ask you, Umar, is it's in the audience. Is Ribbon going to continue to support and offer the physical SBC and the virtual SBC?
Yes, that will continue for some time. The drawdown of those products will be dependent upon, how quickly the market moves to cloud native. There will be at some point in the future, based on the current trend, a natural point at which it would make sense to draw down the physical and the virtual appliances, but we certainly aren't at that stage at the moment. So we'll continue to make that available, but at the same time, continue to promote the cloud native, given that's where the customer interest happens to be.
Okay. I'm seeing like 3 or 4 other questions around, observability, Prometheus, Grafana type questions, very technical. We can reply to those offline, but I think we're out of time, and we'll hand it back to Lance. Is that the last slide I think we had? I think it is, right?
Yes, that would be correct.
Yeah.
All right, back to you, Lance.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, David. Thanks, Umar and Greg and Anu as well, our experts answering some of those questions. And thank you all to the audience for attending today. We really do appreciate your time. We appreciate your engagement. This webinar will be available for replay. The system, Bright Talk, will be sending you that shortly once the system processes the recording. You'll get an email from us too, likely later this afternoon or first thing tomorrow with just a follow-up. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us there. Obviously, ribbоncommunications.com has a lot of great content, documentation, white papers, videos, etc. on all of these topics. We'd love for you to go check that out and engage us there as well if you have questions. Again, we appreciate your time today. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar, and please do look out for those emails coming soon. Thanks again.